Choked her good, hooked good. Nice little chunk. Excuse this frog. This one's caught a lot of bass. Right now we're kind of post-spawn conditions. So you know there's gonna be a good topwater bite. We got overcast, pretty calm out. You know, I'm catching some fish on a frog, but that's a pretty good bite. Not a giant one, but any fish on a topwater is a good one. Cool bite back in them bushes. That's the other thing, the hook in this frog. I'll show you a little bit later. I'd bend it out just a little bit, but the amount of double penetration I get with this hook, it's amazing. A lot of frog hooks seems like you just get one in or one or the other, but this one almost every single time I get two through the roof of the mouth. So. Choking a frog. Cool watching them eating that clear water. It's a nice solid fish. One of the junior Terminator walking frog. It's quickly become my favorite frog. A little smaller profile. You know, it really just gets you a lot more bites. You know, every place you go isn't full of 5 and 6 pound fish, especially in these clear water situations and more open water. This is in that bluegill color. It's probably my favorite all-around color. It just represents so many different things. Any shad, any sort of panfish style bait fish, which is really what a frog emulates more. Everybody thinks when you're throwing a frog that fish think it's a frog, but 9 times out of 10 they're really keyed in more on bluegills when they're eating frogs than actual frogs. You know, if I'm gonna fish an expansive, super heavy cover, pad, flat, with a bunch of duckweed and stuff, that's when I'll opt for the bigger frog. It just moves a lot more water. You know, the fish can really pick up on it in that really heavy cover, but you know, a lot of the times I'm frog fishing, it's a lot more open water stuff. I'll just be, you know, skipping around a little bit of stick ups or underneath some overhanging trees or some fairly sparse cover. That's where I really prefer the smaller profile frog. And it's still heavy. That's the thing I noticed about a lot of the other frogs on the market. Everybody seems to make a small one, but when they downsize them, they get light and it makes them hard to cast. Or this is still a tiny frog, but it's still a 1/2 ounce. So I can still throw it a long ways. It still skips really good. You know, I can cover a ton of water with it versus, you know, most other downsized frogs they're real small. They're kind of hard to cast. And this thing's still got big hooks in it, so you don't have to worry about it. I mean, I've caught 8, 9 pound fish on this little frog, so it's still plenty big for anything you're gonna come across. These are basically the 4 color frogs I'm throwing, depending on conditions and water clarity. We got bluegill. It's one of my favorite. Anytime the water's a little bit clear, the fish are eating bluegills a lot, that's really a go-to for me. And at the same time, if I'm fishing a little bit dirtier water, we got a sexy shad color. That white really shows up a lot better, more in that translucent. If you're in like real stained water, you know, a foot of visibility or less is when I'll pick that up. Kind of the same deal with the black versus the brown. Blacks, I mean, black and white, that's really standard frog fishing. Those two will pretty much get you through anything. I really like, the bluegill's probably my favorite color though. Black, killer frog color, shows up really good. You get a really nice silhouette off of it. This brown and red seems to be a really good color as well. I'll throw that in a little bit clearer water. A lot of that brown colored water, those river systems, you know, they got that tea colored water. I had a buddy used to work where they had a giant fish tank and they'd throw like all different kinds of baits in there to see what the fish would bite. I mean, obviously they're tank fish, so they're a little bit different, but he said the thing they'd bite better than anything in the world was a red ping pong ball. Like they took a bunch of different colored ping pong balls and threw them in the water, but they'd always choke red. So I really like that red frog as well. Oh my goodness. That was awesome. Nice one. Fight him out of the woods a little bit, but an awesome bite. Nice chunker. Yeah, that's another thing I've done with my frog fishing. I use an 8-to-1 gear ratio all the time. You don't got a lot of time to react when one grabs a frog, and believe it or not, they actually don't hold on to them that long. That way when one bites it, a couple quick handle turns, I pick up a lot of line. I'm real tight on them when I go to set the hook. It helps getting them away from that cover too. Especially when you're skipping a frog back in these trees like that. The quicker you can move them out away from that, your landing percentage is gonna go up a lot. And for a frog rod, this one's a 7-1 Andy Montgomery Daiwa Tatula Elite. It's actually a jig skipping rod. He designed it for boat dock fishing, but it's got, you know, that real quick tip, which allows me to make a real accurate cast and skip this frog around, but plenty of backbone. It's a heavy action, but with a real fast tip on it. And this is a rod I'm gonna use for, you know, most of this open water, light cover stuff like this. Whereas if I'm fishing real big mats, Daiwa also makes a 7.4-ish Monroe actual frog rod. It's a lot more powerful. Got a little less tip on it, but you're not really skipping a frog when you're fishing that way. You're just making super long casts, which that extra length helps you do. And you need a little bit more backbone when you're fishing, you know. When one bites it 30, 40 yards across a giant mat and you gotta pull them through all that stuff. You know, most of the stuff we're fishing today, a little bit of bushes and stuff, once I get them out the first 5 feet, it's all open water, and I'm not making real long casts. You know, we're getting in here tight and skipping this frog around these trees and stuff. So I don't have a ton of line out when one bites, so I can get by with a little shorter rod and you know, a lot more comfortable fishing throughout the day with a shorter, lighter rod. I used to be all into like super big rods a few years ago, like almost like 7.5, 8 footers for everything, and I rarely use anything. I really started using a lot more like 7-foot, low 7-foot rods, 7.3, 7.4s. I don't really use a 7.6 much for anything anymore. But when you're fishing all day, it helps with fatigue and stuff. If you're gonna fish as much as I do, at the end of the day, it makes a big difference when you're twitching around a 7-foot rod versus a 7.6 rod or something like that. So I'm actually using 30-pound Suffix 832 braid. I know a lot of guys like frogging with heavier stuff. I've just noticed that when it comes to, well, one, I can cast a lot further with the lighter line than I can, you know, say if a guy's using 65-pound braid, I can throw my frog a lot further. And also when it comes to cutting through vegetation, 30-pound braid, I mean, you can saw reeds in half with 30-pound braid, versus like 65's you know, the grass just ends up getting balled up on there versus cutting through it like that real thin braid does. And the only tip I have when fishing like lighter braid, like 40 you really won't have any issues with it. You can lock your drag down, but I use 30 for a lot of stuff, and a lot of like all my flippings now braid to a leader. One thing you want to do is just back that drag off a little bit. Don't fish it all the way locked down. I mean, after the initial hook set, my drag's not ever really gonna go off, but just to let it slip just a little bit. If you get a really, really good hook set on one, it'll keep you from breaking anything off. And it also helps too when you're, I mean, if you are fishing some tougher places and, you know, little fish matter. If you have a lockdown drag and one eats your frog and you jack them really hard, what you're gonna do, you don't know if it's a 4-pounder or a 10-incher when it bites, so you're gonna crack them hard. A lot of times with a lockdown drag and a little one grab it, you actually like launch them out of the water and end up losing them because you can't stay tight on them. Where you know, if you do let that drag slip a little bit, you maintain steady pull, steady contact the whole way through the fight. And you know, it only slips at like the peak of my hook set. And sometimes if I don't get a great hook set, I got a little bit of slack in the line, it won't slip at all. But if I get locked down on one and jack them hard, it'll give just a little bit. You know, you'll never break your line that way.